Most heroes are reborn as dragon slayers or mighty elves. Me? I awoke to a mouth full of sand and a sun that kills. I am Seo Jihan, and I'm sprawled on a salt flat as unforgiving as concrete. They call this place the Salt Dead End, a forgotten wasteland on the fringes of a kingdom that left us to die. The air is nothing but dust. The ground itself is poison. As I forced myself up, a strange window appeared before my eyes. This wasn't some gamer's level-up screen. It was the cold interface of a manager. System notification. Role assigned. Master of the salt pan. Status. Critical dehydration. Crystallization index. 0.01%. Total failure. I surveyed the area. This wasn't a town. It was a tomb for the living. Only 63 souls remained of the workforce. Half were too frail to even stand. The rest just scraped the earth with rusted tools, harvesting bitter salt that was mostly sand and entirely worthless. I accessed my inventory, or rather, the settlement's ledger. The figures read like a death warrant. Population, 63. Workforce, 28. Water, a 3-day supply, if rationed. Food, 4 days of moldy grain. Tools, 12 ruined shovels, 4 leaky buckets. Infrastructure, 1 barely functioning evaporation pad. The system gave me no sword, just a single, cruel directive. Turn this death into profit. Salt isn't just a commodity, it's the foundation of power. Hey boy, stare at that sun and you'll be blind by noon, a rough voice warned. It was Old Man Joe, the crew leader. His skin was like salt-cracked leather. He held a ladle over a nearly empty barrel. The water's gone by Tuesday, Jihan, he whispered, his eyes sunken. The royal caravan passed us by again. They've written us off as dead. He sighed. Maybe we are. I remained silent. I stared at the salt-caked earth as my system pulsed. If that crystallization index didn't rise, I would be the 64th grave. The index wasn't about salt production. It was about forcing this dead land to support life once more. Old Man Joe, I said, my voice rough. Stop scraping that useless dirt. We need to find the salt pan's heart. The what? The sun's cooked your brain, boy. Get into the shade, he grumbled. I ignored his protests. I spent my first 10 system points, my only starting capital, on a subsurface scan. My vision shifted to a world of blue. Lines of heat and moisture pulsed below the blinding salt. There it was. 50 meters west, beneath the thick crust, lay a pocket of ancient water. A lost cistern from a people who once conquered this desert. But there was a catch. A huge one. The cistern was right under evaporation pad number 3. Our last functioning pad. The only one that made pure salt. Destroying it for water meant our income would vanish. No salt, no trade. No trade, and the next caravan would ignore us completely. Strategic dilemma. Option A. Preserve the pad. Produce 5 kilograms of salt. Result. Everyone dies of thirst in 72 hours. Option B. Destroy the pad. Access the cistern. Risk complete economic ruin. Hand me that pickaxe, I ordered Joe. What? No, the old man cried, blocking my path. That's our only good pad. The other workers gathered, their faces dark and desperate. To them, that pad wasn't just equipment. It was their last hope for a single copper coin. If we don't drink, we can't work, I stated, my voice like ice. This isn't a request. I am the master here now. Move. I didn't wait for an answer. I swung. The pickaxe bit deep into the baked clay. Crack. The workers gasped in horror. A few began to weep. I must have looked like a madman, shattering their only livelihood. I swung again, sweat burning my eyes. The heat was an unbearable 45 degrees Celsius. Each swing drained the last of my strength. System. Stamina at 10%, 5%. With the final swing, the ground didn't just crack. It groaned. A hollow, metallic echo rose from beneath. I heaved the slab open, and the scent of cool, damp air rushed out. Reward. Unlocked. Ancient reservoir found. Water supply increased, plus 5,000 liters. Crystallization index, 0.8%. Survival mode, activated. Water. Someone whispered in awe. Clear. Cold water began to well up from the crack. The workers dropped to their knees, desperately scooping the liquid into their mouths with bare hands. They weren't cheering for me. Not yet. They were just fighting to survive. I collapsed back, my lungs on fire. The first crisis was over. We now had water for a month, but it came at a steep price. Our only source of income was now rubble. Just then, my system pinged a new alert. New problem detected. The scent of water travels fast in the wastes. Threat level, rising. On the horizon, I spotted a rising dust cloud. It wasn't a caravan. It was moving far too quickly. Low, lean shadows darted across the white plains. Salt coyotes. They hadn't tasted water in years, and now they were coming for hours. 28 exhausted men, 12 broken shovels. Don't get used to that water, I rasped. grabbing a shard from the salt pan. We just became a target, and the coyotes came quickly, but starving beasts are no match for 28 men with a reason to fight for their only water. We drove them off with rocks and broken tools, but as the dust settled, the true monster appeared. It wasn't an animal. It was the math. I gazed at the meager pile of salt we'd scraped up over 12 agonizing hours. It was a pathetic gray mound of grit, filled with sand and clay that tasted like rust. Old Man Joe stood over it, wiping his brow. There it is, Jihan. 5 baskets of desert filth. If we're lucky, the merchant will give us a bag of sour grain for it. If we aren't, they'll laugh and leave us here to rot. I knelt down, sifting the grains. The system interface shimmered above the sad pile. Analysis: rock crust, purity 38%, market value 1 copper per 10 kilograms, processing cost 5 liters of water per kilogram. It's garbage, Joe, I said, rising. We're working like slaves to produce actual trash. If we keep going this way, we'll spend more water processing salt than we earn back. A death spiral. It's how we've always done it, Joe snapped, his voice trembling with fatigue. You scrape, wash, and dry. What else can we do? Zoning, I replied. I used a stick to draw a grid in the white dust. The salt pan isn't one uniform sheet. The edges are heavy with calcium and clay, but the center is where pure crystals form. From now on, we stop scraping everything. We'll divide it into 3 sectors: industrial, food grade, and medical. 80% of our labor goes to the heart. I want pure white crystals, not this gray dirt. The workers stared at me like I was insane. To them, more volume always meant survival. But to me, volume was a deadly trap. I needed quality. I needed a product they couldn't refuse. Strategic upgrade, refining platforms. Cost, 200 system points. The effect, a purity increase of 25%, and it reduces water use by 15%. I activated it. The salt crust beneath our feet began to hum. The heart of the pan responded to my will, its mineral layers slowly starting to shift. I had the men build raised platforms from cistern stones. We stopped boiling water, saving fuel we didn't have, and started using fractional crystallization, a technique the system fed into my mind. The numbers changed. 100 kilograms of dirt once gave 10 kilos of bad salt. Now, 50 kilos of choice crust yields 15 kilos of grade A white gold. Look at this, Joe whispered, holding crystallization index. 1.2%. But progress in the desert smells like greed. 3 days into our new system, a dust cloud rose on the horizon. This time, it wasn't animals. It was a carriage, with 4 guards in the governor's tattered blue livery. Out stepped a toad of a man in silk robes. Supervisor Han, the man supposed to manage the pan, but who typically only showed up once a year to collect taxes that he would pocket himself. Well, Han sneered, covering his nose with a perfumed cloth. I heard rumors the salt dead end found a spring. And you've been busy, Seo Jihan. That salt looks expensive. He gestured to a guard, who kicked over a basket of our freshly dried crystals. Since you've had a productive week, the governor's share has tripled. I'll take 70%. Consider it back rent for the king's water. The men froze. 70%? That would leave us absolutely nothing. All our hard work, all our water, gone for this toad's greed. This water was forgotten, Supervisor, I said, stepping forward, just like we were. And the tax is 20% by royal decree. Han laughed, a wet, horrid sound. The decree out here is whatever I say. Guards, load the wagons. If anyone resists, it's obstruction of royal business. Execution on the spot. Fury blazed within me, but I didn't reach for a weapon. I reached for the system. I had the heart of the salt pan under my control, and Han was standing right on a concentrated mineral vein. You want the salt, Supervisor? I whispered. Take it. I focused every scrap of my system energy into the ground beneath him. I didn't make a hole. I did something much worse. I activated instant desiccation. The air around Han went bone dry. The salt in the baskets nearby began pulling moisture from the air and straight from his skin. Han shrieked as his silk robes began to stiffen. The salt in the wagon's weight grew tenfold, the wooden axle snapping under the impossible pressure. What is this sorcery? Han shrieked, collapsing. His skin turned a deathly ashen white. The salt was drinking his very sweat. It's only physics, Supervisor, I stated, approaching him. This land thirsts for water. Try to steal our lifeblood, and the pan will claim yours. Leave the salt. Leave the wagons. Return only when you're ready for a fair trade. Terrified, Han fled into his carriage. His guards saw the ruined wagons and fled on horseback. We were victorious. We seized the wagons, the abandoned horses, and our salt. Han's defeat wasn't just a win. It was intoxicating. For the first time in years, my people weren't staring at the ground in shame. Their eyes were fixed on me. We have horses. We have wagons. We have water. I declared to the 63 souls gathered nearby. But Han will return. And next time, he won't be carrying a perfumed handkerchief. He'll bring soldiers. To survive, we need more than salt. We need walls. We need weapons. We must grow so fast the kingdom can't afford our destruction. The system chimed, sensing my ambition. Opportunity detected. Expansion mode. Goal: triple production in 72 hours. Reward: Crystal Fortress Blueprint. Warning: system stability depends on the salt pan's balance. I dismissed the warning. I was intoxicated by the numbers, by the potential. I pushed the workers into two 16-hour shifts, beneath a crushing sun. We drew heavily from the ancient cistern. We pumped water into massive new basins carved from clay. Seo Jihan. The ground is weakening, Old Man Joe warned, his voice strained. The pan must breathe. Pull too much water, dry it too fast, and the salt turns bitter. It will be tainted with magnesium. No one will buy it. Keep digging, Joe, I snapped, my eyes locked on the blue interface. The system demands 10 tons to reach the next tier. If we fail, we're nothing but a target. Efficiency over tradition. Move. For 48 hours, our home became a hell of sweat and steam. We weren't scraping salt. We were forging an industry. I pushed the 28 workers to their absolute limit, and then forced the elderly and children to sort the crystals. Crystallization index: 1.8%, 2.2, 2.9%. The numbers were soaring. Victory was in sight. But then, the land itself fought back with a low rumble, like a titan waking beneath the salt. Suddenly, the main basin, superheated by the system's power, began to hiss violently. The water wasn't just evaporating, it was boiling. The brine, it's turning black, a worker shrieked. I raced to the edge. The salt was no longer pure white. A dark, oily sludge bubbled up from deep fissures, a mineral overload. I had drained the cistern far too quickly. The pressure shifted, dredging up toxic sediment from the deep earth. And then came the collapse. Crack, boom. The ground beneath the platforms shattered. A 20-meter section of the pan collapsed into a sinkhole. 2 men, my most loyal workers, vanished into the churning slurry of salt and mud. Pull them out. Get the ropes, I screamed, my heart pounding in my chest. We saved them, but their legs were scorched by the caustic brine. One would carry a limp for the rest of his life. Our best salt was gone, replaced by 3 tons of useless gray sludge. System alert. Critical failure. Resource depletion. Cistern level dropped by 40%. Infrastructure damage, 30%. Crystallization index dropped to 0.4%. Cause: resource mismanagement. Morale: broken. The silence that fell was far worse than the roar of the collapse. My people no longer looked at me with hope. They saw me with the same fear they held for the desert. I had become what I fought, a master who treated them as fuel. Old Man Joe approached, dropping a handful of blackened, bitter salt at my feet. You wanted volume, Seo Jihan. Here you go. A mountain of poison. Our well coughs up sand. Our salt is too bitter for a camel. Was any of this worth it? I just sat at the sinkhole's edge, my hands trembling. The system was cold, caring only for the index, not the injured men. I realized then that being master wasn't power. It was a leash. If I focused only on the numbers, the pan would consume us all, myself included. No, I whispered. It wasn't. That night, I wasn't at the command interface. I was in the infirmary tent. I helped Joe bandage the men's chemical burns. My remaining system energy didn't refine salt, but purified the last small pools, slowly turning the bitter black water back to a clear blue. 3 days of work had been lost. I lost my people's trust. I lost the momentum needed to face the kingdom. A hard lesson learned on the price of greed. A new skill unlocked. Sustainability oversight. It let me see the stress of my land and people. On the 4th day, we returned to fundamentals. Smaller batches meant better quality. I monitored the workers' stress gauges, ordering rest the moment they hit yellow. Progress was slow, but the salt was flawless. But my failure created a new vulnerability. Supervisor Han didn't need an army to attack. He spread rumors of poisoned salt to the guilds. We now had water, but a ruined reputation. We had perfect salt, but no buyers. A fortress of treasure nobody dared to touch. We need a witness, I told Joe, staring at our pure white crystals. Someone whose reputation outweighs Han's lies. Someone to see this salt is a miracle. But who would travel to this hellhole to help us? Joe asked. A professional, I replied, gazing toward the horizon. One who hates losing profit as much as I hate losing lives. Just then, I spotted him. A lone scout on a camel. Not a guard, but a scout for a major caravan. The Wasteland's brutal economy was about to shift. I needed someone to account for every grain, a shark for this ocean of salt. That scout wasn't alone. Behind him, a high-speed merchant train shimmered in the heat haze. Not Han's heavy, slow wagons. These were sand skimmers, built for speed and profit. Leading them was a woman who seemed forged from sharp angles and cold iron. Her name was Rena. In the southern desert guilds, they called her the Blood Counter. The salt dead end has new management, I hear, Rena said coolly, stepping from her carriage. She didn't offer her hand. Instead, she produced a scale and magnifying glass. I also heard your salt could kill a horse. Supervisor Han broadcast your failure, Seo Jihan. I met her gaze and signaled Joe for a sample. The purest crystals from our new process. Han is a thief who wouldn't know salt from sand. Taste it. Rena picked up a single crystal. She weighed it, tasted it, then crushed it on black velvet. Her bored eyes sharpened instantly. 99.8% purity, she whispered. In this wasteland? How? Management, I answered. But I have a problem, Rena. I'm a producer, not an accountant. Salt is disappearing. The ledgers don't match the shipments. I need an auditor who isn't afraid of ghosts. Rena glanced at the miserable hovels, then at the white gold in my hand. She smiled, the grin of a predator over a fresh kill. I don't work for pennies, Seo Jihan. I take 5% of total volume and execution rights over any thief. New subordinate recruited. Rena the accountant. Special skill. Phantom audit. Current corruption level. 32%. Critical. Welcome to the dead end, I said. Start counting. Rena wasted no time. By sunset, her desk was set up in the warehouse. Her quill scratched parchment like a blade. While the workers slept, she checked shift logs against delivery receipts. At dawn, she entered my tent and dropped a report on my chest. You're being bled dry, Seo Jihan, she said flatly. Your loyal guards, Han's men, are stealing 40 kilograms of premium salt each night. That's 1,200 kilograms a month. Enough for a villa in the capital. I sat up, system calculations flashing in my eyes. Resource loss confirmed. Missing salt. 1.2 tons. Perpetrators. Sergeant Grom and 6 guards. Status. Traitors. Paid by the Merchant Guild. Grom sees me as a lucky kid with a new well, I muttered, rising. He thinks his sword makes him the real power here. He's not wrong, Rena noted, sharpening her quill. He has weapons. Your workers are terrified. Accuse him, and he'll simply kill you, and report a tragic accident. What's the plan, boss? I won't accuse him, I said, opening my system menu. I'll make his theft impossible to hide. I spent 500 energy points on a new feature, magical tracer seals. It wasn't a visible mark, but a microscopic change to the salt's crystal structure. To the naked eye, everything looked perfectly normal, but through my system interface, the salt now glowed a brilliant neon blue. Joe, Rena, gather everyone, I commanded, striding into the main square. Sergeant Grom was already there. He leaned on a post, hand resting on his blade's hilt, a big, scarred man, filled with arrogance. His smirk told me he knew I was on to his private stash. Is there an issue, Master Seo Jihan? Grom asked, his voice dripping with false concern. Is the sun bothering you? The salt is disappearing, Grom, I announced, so every worker could hear. Someone is stealing from our children. From this day on, no salt leaves this village without my official seal. If any salt is found outside the warehouse without a permit, it is treason against the crown. Grom just laughed. Seals? You plan to sign every single grain? Boy? I wish you luck with that. I didn't return his smile. I faced Rena. Count the evening shift, down to the last gram. That night, Grom did what any greedy man would. He panicked. Knowing the blood counter was coming, he tried to move his entire stolen stash at once. A private carriage was waiting for him 2 miles out in the dunes. Around midnight, my system flared to life. Sensors triggered. A tracer is moving. Volume. 50 bags. 2,500 kilograms. Location. Rear gate. I watched as Grom and his 6 guards loaded the wagon. They moved like shadows, muffled and silent, believing they were invisible. They're on the move, Seo Jihan, Rena whispered beside me in the dark, holding a crossbow I'd purchased from her. We can get them at the gate. No, I said, gently placing a hand on the bow. 7 armed men against the 2 of us? Those odds are poor. We are strategists, Rena. We don't fight the man. I didn't raise the alarm. I didn't call for aid. I simply walked to the main valve of the ancient cistern we had just opened. Grom takes the salt to the desert, I murmured. But the desert belongs to the pan, and the pan demands its water. I diverted the pressure, redirecting the reservoir's entire flow toward the barracks and guard quarters. In minutes, their living space was flooded. But that wasn't the real objective. I had also shut down the external water troughs, the only drinking sources for miles around. Master, Old Man Joe ran to me, frantic. The water, it's vanished from the public tanks. Go back to your rest, Joe, I said, my gaze fixed on the horizon. The water isn't gone. It's merely being held hostage. Grom's men made it 3 miles before the desert night began to bake them alive. The salt flats reflect the day's heat. You can't last an hour out there without water before your own throat seals shut. And Grom had none. I had made sure to sabotage their canteens before they even left. They'll be forced back, Rena said, checking her watch. They must, I agreed. But they won't return as guards. They will return as thirsty criminals. 2 hours later, a truly pathetic sight crawled toward the village edge. Grom and his men stumbled back, their horses foaming, their own tongues swollen. They dragged the salt wagon, too weak to draw their swords. They collapsed in the village square, directly in front of the bone-dry water tank. Water. Grom wheezed, his face peeling. Give us water. I walked to the wagon and drew my lens. I held it over the bags. Through the glass, the stolen salt began to glow with a brilliant blue light. The workers, awakened by the commotion, stared in shock at the revealed crime. 50 bags, Sergeant, I said, looking down on him. That's quite a lot of salt for a man who claims to be on patrol. Please. Grom grabbed for my boot. The heat. It burns. Rena, I called. State the penalty for stealing royal resources during a crisis. Exile into the desert without water, she replied, her voice cold as ice. Or permanent labor in the deep salt pits. I stared at the broken men. You have a choice, Grom. Walk back into that desert now, or pick up a shovel and work off your debt. But if you ever dare touch a sword again, I will personally turn the pan against you. Morale increased by 40%. Internal security status stabilized. Grom and his men chose the shovels. The guards were ours, the salt was back, and the workers saw my protection. But as Rena logged the recovered bags, her expression turned to ice. She stared at a letter found in Grom's pocket, a letter he had failed to burn. Seo Jihan, she whispered. We have a problem. Grom wasn't working for Han. Then who was he working for? The Great Desert Merchant Guild, the same guild that controls all grain shipments for this province. Grom's contact states if the salt doesn't arrive by the full moon, they will declare this sector a plague zone. What? A plague zone? I demanded. It means they cut off the caravans, Rena said, her eyes wide with terror. No grain, no medicine. Absolutely no outside contact. They plan to starve us out, Seo Jihan. They don't need to fight us for the salt. They will simply wait until we die of hunger, then take it for free. A plague zone declaration wasn't a death by the sword, a silent death sentence. For 3 days after Rena found the letter, the horizon was a barren wasteland. No dust from grain wagons, no sound from merchant caravans. Salt Dead End was being methodically erased from existence. The ledgers are bleeding red. Seo Jihan, Rena warned, tapping the book. Her sharp gaze swept over our emptying silos. We have 63 workers and 7 guards, now trapped here with us. We burn through 40 kilograms of grain daily. In exactly 9 days, the bins will be empty. Then, there's only sand. Old Man Joe paced, his hands shaking. You can't fight famine, boy. Your magic salt can't fill bellies. If the caravan doesn't come, they'll leave. They'll face the desert over starving here. System alert. Food security critical. Estimated time to famine, 9 days. Morale decay, -5% daily. They won't starve, Joe. My mind scoured the system's data. The guild thinks controlling roads means they own the desert, but they've forgotten something vital. The desert is more than roads. It belongs to the people of the sands. The sandwalkers? Rena's eyebrow rose. The nomads? They're savages, Seo Jihan. They don't use coin, and they have no grain. But, I countered, they have cattle, massive herds of buffalo and camels, and I know their greatest weakness. They lose half their meat to rot weekly. They butcher an animal, and the rest spoils before it can be sold. My gaze fell upon our refined salt, our white gold. Salt is more than flavor, Rena. In a world without ice, salt is time. A battery for preserving life. Strategic decision. Resource transformation. Goal. Evolve from salt mine to food hub. Tactic. Meat preservation via salting. I sent Rena's scout into the dunes. He carried 1 bag of our grade A salt. His mission. Find the Blue Veil tribe. Tell them, Salt Dead End offers an exchange. A trade of life for salt. 2 days passed. The horizon shimmered with countless hooves. The nomads descended like a storm, their blue robes flying. Their leader was a scarred chieftain named Varric. He eyed our small settlement, his suspicion clear. So, you're the boy who claims he can stop the rot? Varric's voice was like grinding stones. He gestured to a butchered buffalo. In the sun, the meat was already turning gray. Save this meat, and I'll trade you 3 live cattle. For every 10 bags of your white dust. Watch, I replied. I didn't just use salt. I created a desiccation zone in the warehouse using the salt pan's core. I taught everyone, even Grom's shamed guards, the method. Slice the meat thin, rub the salt deep into the fibers, then hang it in the salt-chilled air of our chambers. Processing log. Meat curing initiated. Input, 500 kilograms raw meat, 50 kilograms grade A salt. Output, 350 kilograms rations. Shelf life, 6 months. System bonus, Nutrient retention increased by 20%. As the sun set, the warehouse's smell had completely changed. It was the scent of rich, cured meat. Varric chewed a piece slowly, his eyes widening. It wasn't merely preserved. It was delicious. Our high-purity salt left no bitter mineral aftertaste. This surpasses the king's own rations, Varric declared. He signaled his men. Bring the cattle. We have a deal. Morale increased by 60%. Food security established. Rina furiously scribbled in her ledgers. Seo Jihan. Do you know what this means? We no longer need the guild's grain. We have a direct supply of nomadic protein. By processing their meat for trade, we're not just some mining camp. We're a food fortress. Exactly, I confirmed. Rina, give me a full inventory of the salted meat packs. Pack them in sealed leather bags. Now. We wait for the guild's envoy. He's coming to see if we've starved. The envoy came on the 10th day, the day our famine was to begin. He arrived on a fine white horse, flanked by professional mercenaries. He expected to find starving beggars pleading for their lives. Instead, he found our people gathered around a huge fire. They were roasting fresh beef, laughing and eating dried meat. The scent of barbecue drifted over the salt flats. It struck the envoy like a physical blow. What is the meaning of this? He roared, his face turning crimson. This land is quarantined. You are supposed to be starving. Quarantine? I asked, emerging with a strip of jerky. I offered it to him. We must not have noticed. We've been rather busy. In fact, we just signed a 3-year exclusive deal with the Blue Veil nomads. Apparently, they prefer our salt over your moldy grain. The envoy stared at the healthy cattle grazing nearby. He saw defiance in the workers' eyes. The blockade hadn't just failed. It had backfired spectacularly. Isolating us only birthed our own economy. The guild won't forget this, Seo Jihan. The envoy snarled, refusing the meal. Do you truly believe you can survive on meat? You still need our tools, our cloth, our lumber. My salt can buy everything I need, I answered coldly, from anyone outside your pathetic guild. And starting now, the price of salt for your guild has tripled. You will pay in lumber and iron. Or you can explain to the capital why their salt prices just rose 500%. The envoy fled in a cloud of dust. We had won our first trade war. Reward. Food independence. A new system unlocked. The salt architecture. Effect. You can now use salt composites for construction. Rina approached me, her ledger held tightly. We survived the famine, Seo Jihan, but you humiliated the most powerful guild. Next time, they'll send soldiers, not sanctions. I know, I said, watching my people. They were now stronger and fiercely loyal. That's why we're done with these wooden shacks. If they want our salt, they'll have to break through walls of it first. I opened the system menu. The crystallization index was shining. We had enough points for our first major upgrade. Joe, Rina, Grom, I called out to my lieutenants. The celebrations are over. The dead end is finished. Tomorrow, we begin building the salt fortress. A new problem was detected. Regional attention. The king's agents now know of the desert's meat gold. Threat level. High. Under the blazing sun, Lord Qasim's vanguard appeared like a serpent of steel. 100 heavy cavalry. These weren't the starving men we had faced before. These were professionals, well-fed, clad in iron, on war horses worth more than our entire village. They'll be here in 20 minutes, Rina said, her voice tight as she stared through a telescope. They're not even slowing. They expect us to surrender at the sight of their banners. To them, we're just squatters. Let them think that, I replied. I sat on the ramparts, my mind connected to the salt pan itself. To a normal person, the ground outside was just a flat, white plain of salt. But to me, it was a circuit board, primed with 3,000 purity points. I wasn't just building walls. I was building a chemical nightmare. Defensive project, the salt blight perimeter. Active agent, concentrated magnesium brine. Effect, rapid oxidation. Cost, 500 liters of water per minute. Grom, I shouted. Are the white holes ready? Ready, master, Grom yelled. He and 50 men had spent 6 hours digging shallow pits. They filled them with a salt slurry and a special mineral catalyst pulled from the system. A thin salt crust hid the traps. To the approaching cavalry, it looked like solid ground. Rina, once they hit the first line, signal the nomads. They don't have to fight, just look like an army on the dunes. Illusion is 90% of a desert war. The vanguard slowed at the 500-meter mark. A single rider in a crimson cape trotted forward. This was Sir Kale, the vanguard commander. He stared at our gleaming salt walls with awe and a predator's greed. His voice echoed. By order of Lord Qasim, this dead end is now a strategic asset of the southern province. Open your gates, surrender your supplies, and you might live. You have 60 seconds. I stood, looking down at him. Sir Kale, you trespass on land given to me by royal decree. My people are hungry, and my walls are strong. If you want our meat, you will pay the market price. And if you want my fortress, you'll have to survive the desert first. Kale didn't bother to argue. He drew his sword, its steel flashing brightly. Heavy cavalry. Charge! Break the gates! Leave the master alive! 100 war horses, each 600 kilograms, galloped forward. The very ground began to shake. Inside, I could see the terror returning to my people's eyes. They had spent their lives being trampled by men like this. Hold, I whispered, my hand over the system. The cavalry crossed the 300-meter mark. They had entered the kill zone. Now, I activated the brine vents. The ground beneath them liquefied, but not with water. It was a brine slurry, colder than ice, more corrosive than acid. Trap activated. The hygroscopic sink. The front line of horses stopped dead, as if hitting an invisible wall. The salt crust had vanished. A thick, white mire erupted, leaching moisture from everything it touched. Horses shrieked as caustic salt seared their hooves. But the true alchemy was rapid oxidation. "My armor!" a soldier screamed. "It's glowing!" My enhanced salt met their iron plates. In a normal world, rust takes years. But in my salt pan, backed by the crystallization index, it took mere seconds. Rivets on their breastplates turned to orange dust. Their joints seized as the metal flaked away. "Retreat! Fall back!" Kale yelled, but his own horse was trapped chest-deep in the mire. Its leather saddle cracked and shriveled as the salt drank its oils. The vanguard was a mess as men fell into the brine. Their skin turned white, their expensive weapons now rusted scrap. A non-lethal defeat, but an absolute one. They were a pack of broken soldiers in a sea of white despair. "Rena, now." On the dunes, 300 nomads of the Blue Veil tribe appeared. They didn't charge. They just watched, silhouetted against the sun, their spears glinting. To the panicked soldiers, it looked like an army of thousands. Sir Kale, now covered in a white salt crust, his fine armor a rusted cage. He looked up. His eyes held the unique terror of a soldier facing the unknown. "What are you?" he wheezed. "I am the master of this salt pan," my voice echoed off the rock walls. "And you stand in my workshop. Go back to Lord Kasim. Tell him this very ground defeated his vanguard. If he wants to talk, he comes as a merchant, not a conqueror. Or next time, I'll turn his blood to salt." I released the pressure. The salt drained away, leaving them in a dry, cracked basin. They scrambled away, abandoning rusted armor and useless equipment, fleeing south. Inside, there was no cheering, only a heavy, stunned silence. Then, old Joe sat on a salt rock and just laughed, a wild, hysterical sound that soon infected everyone. Grom was slapping his knees. Even Rena wore a faint, predatory smirk. "We did it," Joe gasped. "We drove off 100, Rena corrected, her quill already scratching the ledger. "But Seo Jihan, look at the cost." She showed me the numbers. Resources exhausted. Water down 15,000 liters. System energy at 10%. Worker exhaustion is high. Today was a miracle, Seo Jihan. Rena looked at me with new intensity. "But you've just humiliated a powerful military lord. Kasim won't just send more men. He'll go to the king. He'll call you a rebel wizard, building a fortress of white gold. He'll make us a national threat." "I know," I said, gazing at the rusted armor on the salt flats. "That's why we don't stop here. We have the walls. We have the traps. Now, we build influence." I turned to Grom. "Gather every scrap of that rusted iron. We'll melt it down, mix it with our salt composite, and build something this kingdom has never seen, the Salt Iron Road." "And what's that for?" Joe asked. "For the Grand Caravan," I replied. "The desert was once a barrier, but with our salt paving, we can build a road that never shifts or floods, letting wagons travel 3 times faster. We aren't hiding in this fortress, Joe. We will become the center of the world's trade. If the king wants us gone, he'll have to destroy his own economy." This was no longer about survival. We had water, we had food, we had walls. Now, we would build an empire on a foundation of salt. But my own hands were pale and cracked. My stress bar was deep in the red. The system was pushing me as hard as I was pushing it. "Seo Jihan?" Rena's voice was uncharacteristically soft. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," I said, as the desert light seemed to burn too bright. "Just prepare the meat for the next trade, and find me a spy. I need to know what Lord Qasim is telling the king." The salt fortress was finished. But the great game of kings had just begun. The Alabaster Highway was a blade that cut deeper than any sword. In 3 months, this salt dead end transformed from a hovel into a shimmering beacon of commerce. Our salt rock roads were a revolution. A merchant wagon could now travel 30 miles a day, not 10. Through the salt meat trade, my people weren't just surviving, they were thriving. Status update: the Alabaster Hub. Population: 850, plus 400 nomads. Crystallization index: 12.5%. Our influence grew, supplying 40% of the frontier. Rena, her fingers ink-stained, warned, "The coin is flowing in, Seo Jihan." But so is the gossip. In the capital, They're calling you the Salt King. They whisper of hidden gold mountains and an army of desert ghosts you're raising. I don't want an army, I said from the ramparts. I want a trade monopoly. If we control the salt, the king can't touch us. A gruff voice cut in. He'll just kill the man who owns the road. It was Sergeant Grom, returned from a scouting mission on the southern borders. Dust caked his face. Lord Qasim is returning, Seo Jihan. And this time, he isn't bringing 100 scouts. He's leading the Iron Hammer Division. 5,000 infantry, 300 siege engines, and royal alchemists. They're 10 days out. A cold silence fell over the command room. 5,000 men. Against our fortress, we had fewer than 300 fighters, mostly miners and scouts. We were an economic miracle, but a military insect to the kingdom's Iron Hammer. System alert. Existential threat detected. Opponent, Iron Hammer Division. Strength level, 10,000. Our defense, 1,200. Survival probability, 4.2%. We can't fight them, Old Man Joe whispered, his hands shaking. They'll just besiege us. Wait for the sun to cook us alive and dismantle everything we've built. No, I said, my eyes narrowing. Qasim is a professional. A long siege would kill his own men first. He wants a swift, decisive strike, to break our walls and make an example of me. But the army wasn't our only problem. 2 days later, a new figure arrived at our gates. He carried no sword. With a bone staff and white robes, he called himself the Prophet. The salt is a curse, he screamed to the workers. This master unearths ancient demons from the very bowels of the earth. The white gold you eat is the dust of the dead. This fortress is a tomb built on sin. Internal threat, religious fervor, morale decay, minus 10% per hour, descent level, 25% and rising. Rina hissed. The people are scared, Seo Jihan. He claims last month's sinkhole was a sign of divine anger. He's telling them the ground will swallow them whole if they remain here. 20 workers fled into the dunes last night. I watched the Prophet. He was more dangerous than Qasim. He was attacking the very soul of our operation. If belief faltered, production would stop. No production meant no points for defense. Strategic dilemma. Prophecy versus the pan. Option A. Execute the Prophet. It would stop the descent, but fear would cause morale to plummet. The risk of rebellion was high. Option B. Debate him. A high risk of failure. Logic rarely defeats faith. Option C. Assimilate the miracle. Use the system to outperform the gods. I'm not going to kill him, Rina, I said. I'm going to make him a believer. I spent 8,000 purity points. I purchased a new system tier, atmospheric crystallization. That night, the Prophet was shrieking about demons in the dust. That's when I activated the heart of the pan. I didn't pull salt from the ground. I pulled humidity from the air. I took the invisible water from the desert night and fused it with mineral dust floating on the wind. Suddenly, it began to snow. Not cold flakes, but shimmering crystals of pure salt, falling like manna from a cloudless sky. The crystals glowed with a soft blue light, coating the entire fortress and the crowd in stardust. My voice, amplified by the system, boomed. Is this the dust of the dead? Or is it a bounty from some the pan doesn't just take, Prophet. It gives. It turns the very air into food. If your gods hate us, why shower us with treasure? The Prophet fell to his knees, staring at the glowing salt in his palms. He tasted one. It was the purest salt ever made, filled with the system's vitality buff. Morale restored, 100%. New subordinate recruited. The Prophet. Effect. Religious fervor now fuels the workforce. Production speed, plus 30%. A miracle, the crowd whispered. Fear had been replaced by a fanatical devotion. They weren't just workers now, they were the chosen of the pan. That was an expensive trick, Seo Jihan, Rina said quietly. But that only solves our internal woes. The Iron Hammer is still marching, and a salt blizzard won't stop 5,000 heavy infantry. No, I declared, my gaze fixed on the alabaster highway vanishing into darkness. But this highway will, Grom, gather every scrap of rusted iron from our first victory. Old Man Joe, I need the magnesium slurry in unthinkable quantities. We won't just be defending these walls. We're turning the entire road into our weapon. The strategy was simple, but utterly terrifying. Lord Qasim loved his hammer, his heavy infantry that marched in impenetrable formations. He relied on the road to move his massive siege engines. I'm going to let him use that road, I informed my council. I will let him march all 5,000 men onto the alabaster highway, and then I will awaken the Salt Rock's piezoelectric soul. Tactical plan, the conductive trap. Mechanism, a salt iron road, static accumulation, and the ancient brine conduit. Potential damage, total system wipe of the Iron Hammer. It's a suicide gambit if your timing is off, Joe warned. If you trigger it too early, you only take out the vanguard. Trigger it too late, and they'll already be inside our gates. I will be the one to trigger it, I said. I will stand at the gate, alone. When their front line reaches the 10-meter mark, I ground the circuit. 10 days passed in a frenzy of frantic preparation. We didn't build more walls. We built vents. We tunneled beneath the highway, laying thin lines of conductive wire refined from rusted scrap, soaked in hypersaturated brine. The Alabaster Highway was no longer a road. It was the world's largest electrical capacitor, awaiting its spark. On the dawn of the 11th day, the iron hammer arrived. It was a solid wall of steel that stretched from horizon to horizon. The sound of 5,000 boots on sand was a constant, low thunder. At its center was Lord Kasim, on a massive armored horse, surrounded by his alchemists. They had witnessed the salt blight traps from the first battle. They were prepared for corrosion. They wore oiled silk over their armor to stop salt contact. CEO Seo Jihan. Kasim's voice boomed, amplified by an alchemical megaphone. You have built a wonder in this desolate wasteland. It is a pity I must break it. Surrender now, and I will only execute your leaders. The rest will be royal slaves. I stood upon the bridge of the main gate, a single copper rod in my hand, connected to the deep core aquifer. Lord Kasim, you march on a road I have built. You breathe, take one more step, and you are no longer a guest of the pan. You are a sacrifice. Kasim laughed. Alchemists, shield the front. Iron hammer, charge. The 5,000 men accelerated. They didn't run. They marched in a terrifying rhythmic stomp. The vibration of 5,000 armored boots striking the Salt Rock Highway began to generate a hum. Static electricity, amplified by the system's mineral properties, started to crackle along the road's white surface. System status, accumulation at 85%, 90%. Wait for it, I whispered, my hand white-knuckled on the copper rod. The front line hit the 200-meter mark, the 100-meter mark. The silk-clad alchemists were smug, seeing their corrosion protection hold. They hadn't realized I wasn't attacking their armor. I was attacking their very nervous systems. Now, I slammed the copper rod into the brine-soaked socket at my feet. The sound wasn't a crack of thunder. It was a low, agonizing hum, like a million hornets trapped inside a jar. The moment the copper rod hit the brine, the Alabaster Highway transformed. The salt rock composite, built with special mineral veins, didn't just carry the current, it massively amplified it. The static electricity from 5,000 marching boots, which I'd stored for 3 months in the highway's foundation, was released in a single, blue-white pulse. System log, piezoelectric discharge, voltage, 50,000 volts, distributed, amperage, lethal contact points, duration, 12 seconds. The iron hammer's front line didn't even have a moment to scream. 500 heavy infantrymen, linked by their shields and silk armor, became a single, massive conductor. Blue lightning arced from shield to shield, turning their wall into a glowing cage of steel. Kasim's alchemists tried to react. I saw them frantically waving their bone-white staves, trying to ground the energy. But the sand was dry, and my brine conduits were buried deep. I was attacking them from the soles of their boots upward. The silk, Kale, the vanguard commander from the first battle, shouted from the rear. It's not stopping the hum. The salt in the air is making the silk conductive. He was correct. I spent 8,000 points on that salt blizzard for a reason. Every soldier in that army was coated in microscopic, hyper-pure salt crystals. They were no longer just soldiers. They were 5,000 lightning rods. Casualty report. Iron Hammer Division, incapacitated, 1,800. Equipment destroyed, 3,200 sets. Command integrity, shattered. But the trap had a price, a heavy one. I felt a sharp, metallic tang in the back of my throat. The very heart of the pan was screaming. To maintain that output, I was draining the mineral essence of the salt bastion. System alert, overheating, infrastructure failing, 40% of the Alabaster Highway is dissolving, crystallization index plummeting, mineral resources depleted, purity points are at 0. Jihan! Stop! Rena's voice cut through the ozone's roar. She pointed at the road. The entire highway was liquefying. 3 months of profit gone in 10 seconds. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. If I stopped, 3,000 soldiers would swarm us and tear us to pieces. I shoved the rod deeper, feeling the heat blister my hands. Just 5 more seconds, I roared. I wasn't just stopping them. I was breaking their spirit. Then, the humming ceased. A thick, ozone-filled silence fell over the wasteland. The once pristine highway was now a steaming ruin. Thousands of soldiers collapsed, paralyzed, their armor glowing a menacing, dull red. But Lord Kasim still stood. His warhorse was dead, but his alchemists had saved him, creating a void bubble at the cost of their staves. He stood amidst a sea of defeated men. His face was pale, his gaze locked onto me. You're a monster, CEO Jihan, Kasim whispered, his shaking voice echoing through the alchemical megaphone. This wasn't just a defeat. You annihilated the kingdom's finest division. 2. With a road. I warned you, Kasim, I said, my legs shaking as I stepped onto the bridge. You were never a guest here. You were a sacrifice. Look at your men. They are still breathing, still alive, but they're defenseless, unarmed, with no path home. If you want them to survive, sign the Treaty of the White Sunday. Strategic victory achieved. The Iron Hammer is neutralized. The treaty was pure humiliation, far more than a simple ceasefire. To keep his men from dying in the dunes, he surrendered 70% of his supplies, grain, iron, even his horses. But the true prize was the document he signed, recognizing the Salt Dead End as an autonomous duchy, loyal only to the king. Reward, de facto sovereignty. Crystallization index at a new peak of 15%. Acquired, 200 Iron Hammer craftsmen. As the Iron Hammer survivors retreated, leaving their ruined armor, the harsh reality of our victory sank in. Rena approached the destroyed highway. She kicked at a chunk of melted salt rock. It turned to gray dust. We won, Jihan. But our ledgers are bleeding. Every last drop of water is gone. That miracle snow drained our mineral reserves. Rebuilding the highway will take 6 months and 50,000 points. We won't rebuild it yet, I said, leaning on the cool salt wall. We have something better now. What? Their fear, I said, and all of their iron. I pointed at the scorched armor, fused into thousands of metal husks on the road. Grom, fire up the furnaces. We're no longer just a salt mine. We now control 3,000 tons of military-grade steel. We'll build a new road, a salt-steel hybrid that can't be melted. New project, the Titan Path. Goal, reconstruct highway with armor composite. Effect, permanent defense and high-speed logistics. But a new crisis arrived sooner than I thought. That night, a royal messenger hawk landed on my shoulder while we counted our spoils. It held a solid gold cylinder. Inside was a scroll, penned by the king himself. Jihan? Rena whispered while I read. What is it? It's not about taxes, I said, my blood running cold. It's an invitation. The king knows I can summon lightning and create stardust. He isn't sending soldiers this time. He's sending the Royal Inquisition of the High Arcana. The Inquisition? Old Man Joe gasped. They're the ones who cleanse anything they can't control. If they discover your system, they'll tear you apart. New threat detected. The Royal Inquisition. Objective: seize the Pan's heart. Eliminate the heretic master. Estimated arrival: 14 days. They believe they're hunting a heretic, I mused, glancing from my blistered hands to the fortress I'd built from dust. But they're walking into a domain where every sand grain is a sensor, and every water drop is a weapon. I looked at my team. The Prophet, leading prayers to increase our production. Grom, forging the captured steel. And Rena, already calculating the cost of war against the crown. We survived starvation, I began. We survived the merchant's greed. We survived the military's might. Now, we will survive the gods themselves. Final preparation initiated. Goal: subvert the Inquisition. Risk: annihilation of the province. The siege was over, but it was just the beginning. I had 14 days to make my fortress a perfect trap. My stress gauge was flashing red. My body had reached its absolute limit. The index hit 15%, revealing a new tier, a new power, Salt Mind Overlink. I now had direct control over every subordinate. Rena, my own voice sounded distant. Prepare the ledgers. Let the Inquisition see the fortune the king will lose if we fall. We won't meet their magic with our own. We'll crush them with economics. The Salt Dead End was now a choke point I controlled. I had my hand on the kingdom's very throat. From the Crystal Bastion's peak, I surveyed the world I'd built. The desert wind still burned hot, but now it carried the clang of 300 captive smiths at their forges. Others see a wasteland, I whispered, checking the system interface. But I see a ledger that finally balances. Status: the Salt Duchy of the Dead End. Population: 1,250. 63 originals, 400 refugees, 300 captives, and 487 traders. Resources: water, infinite. Food: 12 months of reserves. Steel: 3,100 tons of recycled armor. Currency: 50,000 gold sovereigns. Infrastructure: a level 2 bastion, thermal regulated. The Alabaster Highway, now undergoing salt iron reconstruction. Crystallization index: 16.5%. Not bad, for what was once a puddle in the salt. Rena spoke, appearing beside me. She was no longer a dusty accountant. She wore silk-dyed desert indigo, her ledger bound in lizard leather. But, Jihan, we're out of purity points. The lightning trap drained you completely. If they arrive now, you can't even summon a breeze. I know, I said. That's why I'm no longer a miner, but a king. Below, the prophet led 1,000 souls in a silent ritual. They weren't praying, they were vessel linking. All through the Salt Mind Overlink, I could feel every heartbeat in the fortress. They were my biological processor. Their focus recharged my system by 500 points per hour. System recharge, 85%. 90%. Grom, I called to the square. The former sergeant looked up. Now my minister of iron. He rose from a pool of steel. Master, the first 10 miles are set. Harder than diamond, it reflects 90% of the sun's heat. A legion could reach the capital in 3 days. Good, I replied, because the king is no longer my primary concern. The horizon didn't turn dusty, it turned white. On the 14th day, the Royal Inquisition arrived. This was no army. A single, massive carriage of floating marble, pulled by 6 spectral lions. 12 inquisitors in gold masks surrounded it. They didn't march but floated, as if my road was too filthy for them. Threat detected. The High Inquisition leader, Grand Master Valerius. Power level, undetectable. I met them at the gate alone, unarmed, wearing only a simple robe of salt fiber. Valerius emerged from the marble carriage. He wasn't a priest. He was a living statue. He ignored my walls. He ignored my steel. He knelt, touching the road with a silver-tipped finger. This is not alchemy, he whispered, his voice vibrating my bones. And this isn't magic. It's evolution. It's just salt, Grand Master, I said, and some hard work. Do not lie to the crown, CEO Seo Jihan. He stood, his eyes black voids. We analyzed the stardust you gave them. It doesn't just feed them, it rewrites them. Your workers have 30% higher bone density. Their blood carries more oxygen. This is no trade hub. You're breeding a new human race that can survive this wasteland. Warning, secret objective revealed. The kingdom wants the biological salt code. I'm building a future where no one dies of thirst, I replied. The king can buy into that future. If he steals it, he'll find this salt hard to swallow. Valerius smiled. A cold, terrifying sight. The king is a fool. He sees a rebel. I know what you are. You found the Leviathan's ancient heart. You're unearthing the god who made this desert. Suddenly, the very ground beneath us didn't just shake. It inhaled. A deep, massive groan echoed from the aquifer. My system interface exploded with red warnings. Critical alert. The heart is awakening. Crystallization index force jumped to 25%. New objective. Suppress the Leviathan or the province ends. Valerius stared at the ground, his dark eyes widening with hunger. It's happening sooner than the prophecy said. Seo Jihan, we didn't come here to kill you. Were you the lock, or were you the key? I stared down at my hands. They were crystallizing into pure white light. My domain link expanded instantly. I saw through the eyes of everyone in my fortress. And then, deeper still, my consciousness plunged 1,000 miles beneath the salt flats. A massive, slumbering eye, miles wide, began to open. A system notification appeared. The final choice. Path 1, the King's Pawn. Surrender the heart to the Inquisition. Path 2, the Salt Sovereign. Devour the Leviathan and become this land's new god. Seo Jihan, Rena screamed from the ramparts. The ground is cracking. Something is rising. My gaze fell on Valerius, then to my people. Finally, I turned to the shimmering system window. I am no one's pawn, I whispered, my voice booming with the force of grinding mountains of salt. And I am no god. I am the master of this domain. This is my territory. I slammed my crystal hand into the earth. System override initiated, consuming the Leviathan. A blinding white light erupted from the fortress core, turning night into a burning midday sun. The Inquisition, the walls, the very desert, all vanished in a storm of crystalline power. When the light faded, the salt dead end was gone. In its place stood a city of living, pulsing diamond, floating 10 feet above the sand. The desert had become a shimmering sea of liquid salt. The first arc was complete. New title, Duke of the Salt Sea. Next threat, the Continental Crusade. I opened my eyes. I was no longer in the fortress. I was inside the mind of the desert itself, and I could feel every single heartbeat in my kingdom. Rena, I spoke, my voice reaching her across the miles. Double the prices. We will need far more gold for the war to come.